Hello and welcome to the Visual Studio 2010 Performance Testing Webinar. My name is Ian Holdsworth and I am a consultant with Testhouse, the independent software testing specialists. We are an award-winning software testing consultancy and a Microsoft partner with offices in London, Madrid, Kerala, as well as the United States, Dubai and Saudi Arabia. We offer test guidance and process improvement, as well as test management, manual and automated testing, application lifecycle management support from Agile all the way to CMMI. We support both functional and non-functional testing, such as load testing, and are dedicated to process improvement using Visual Studio 2010 and Team Foundation Server. Here we have a subset of our clients in the Middle East. Microsoft Visual Studio 2010 is a multifaceted development platform comprising not only support for Microsoft Team Foundation Server, but also Microsoft Test Manager, lab management, unit testing, performance and load testing, as well as many others. Over the next few months, Testhouse will be presenting a series of training sessions and webinars on many of these aspects. Today I am primarily going to be concentrating on performance testing. Probably the most important thing to understand about web performance tests is that they operate purely at the HTTP layer. The recorder resides in the browser and records all the interactions between the browser and the web server, including the timings between requests. Note that this is the extent of the browser's participation in the web test, and that when the web test is played back, there is no browser. The main purpose of web tests is for producing load in load tests. The process of web testing can be broken down into three basic areas: recording, parameterization and playback, although it should be said that these three steps should really be preceded by a planning stage. Recording can be as simple as performing a test case whilst in the recorder. Allow me to demonstrate. I'm going to load Visual Studio 2010, and from the test menu I'm going to select New Test, and from the Add New Test dialog I'm going to select Web Performance Test, and I'm going to call it Search.WebTest. From the Add Test Project drop-down box, I'm going to select Create a new C# test project and click OK. I will now be asked for the name of my project. I will call it Search. I am now presented with the web test recorder. I'm going to press pause and give you a quick run through of its different options, which are fairly straightforward. You have record, pause, stop, add a comment and delete. Before I proceed, I'm going to add the comment for my first test step, which will be launch bing.com. I'm going to press record, and now I'm going to go and launch bing.com. Bing is loaded. I'm going to press pause. I'm going to add another comment I'm going to say for this comment, search for test house. Click OK, and then press record again. And I'm just going to search for test house. I'll press pause again. You'll notice that even though we've recorded only 2 test steps, for each we have multiple recordings. Not only have we launched the actual website, but we appear to have loaded a number of the site's dependencies as well. I'm now going to add another comment for the validation we're going to want to do at the end of the test. Validate that testhouse.net is in the results, and press the stop button. We are now presented with the web test editor, and also immediately Microsoft Visual Studio attempts to detect dynamic parameters. The web test editor has a number of options. Play the test, add a data source, set the credentials, record more web tests, add a test plugin, add a request plugin, generate source, parameterize web servers, promote dynamic parameters, which is already run for this one, set request details, and create a performance session for this test. Before we proceed any further, let me first demonstrate what should probably be the first action performed on any newly recorded web test, and that is to parameterize the web servers. I will therefore click on the Parameterize Web Servers button. I am presented with a list of web servers which Visual Studio has identified in the recording. These I'll rename to something a little bit more friendly. And click the OK button. Notice how the URLs have now been replaced by our context parameters surrounded by a pair of double curly brackets or braces. The double braces surrounding our context variables indicate that this whole section is to be replaced by the value of the context parameter. As we can see, we have our context parameters in these instances set up here. Right, let's take a quick look at what we have recorded. The first thing we notice is that although we had only 2 steps plus one we have yet to implement, we appear to have a lot of requests. Some of these may be irrelevant to the testing we wish to achieve. For instance, when performing performance tests, do we really want to include third-party advertisers and analytical services? These can normally be safely removed from the test. I say normally. You might have a situation where you need to ascertain if one of your third-party suppliers is causing your site to be less than responsive. If we expand some, we'll see that some have extraction rules and some have query string parameters. We might also notice that some have form posts, although I know there are none in this particular example. There may also be some with hidden fields that are being extracted. In fact, here we have some. The web test recorder will record many things: query strings, form parameters, hidden form fields, and cookies. Note that the majority of these will be recorded to string constants and will need parameterization later. There are also a number of objects that are not recorded. These include images, cascading style sheets, JavaScript, and other resources. Note that these resources are detected and downloaded at runtime in order to make the loading of the system realistic. Also note that redirects are followed at runtime. There are a number of objects in any web performance test which should be parameterized. These include web servers, query strings, form fields, and cookies. Many of these the web test recorder tries to do automatically for you. However, the majority of them will need to be done manually. The principal method of doing this is via extraction rules. Allow me to demonstrate. Let's locate the first parameter we wish to parameterize. And let's put it in the clipboard. Once we have identified what we want to parameterize, let's run the web test. The reason we do this is because almost all of the values we are likely to parameterize we will need to pull out of the previous responses from the web server. As the web test is finishing running, let's take a quick tour around the results page. The first thing we should notice is the status icon on the far left hand side. This will normally be either a green circle with a tick or a red circle with an X, signifying whether the test has passed or not. Next across we have the URL. You will notice how the Bing in curly brackets and the Bing API in curly brackets have both been replaced by http://www.bing.com and also by the db3 API bing.com that we previously parameterized. Following the URL is the HTTP status, which should normally be 200, but there are other statuses which are okay. The total time, the request time, the requested bytes, and the response bytes. Also, we see each request has a number of tabs. These are web browser, web request, the response, context, and details. The web browser tab shows us the web response as a rudimentary web browser. And if I just click there, you can see the web page has kind of been rendered. This gives us a user-friendly view of the web response, if not quite how we would see it in an actual browser. The web request tab shows us the headers, cookies, and query string parameters. Query string parameters, and form post parameters. The latter three should be the main focus of your parameterization efforts. The response tab shows us the response header and body text. Note that we can view the body in a more readable format by clicking the HTML editor link, which those of you who are familiar with HTML will see that it's much easier to follow what's going on. I close that. The context tab we see all of our context variables. So here we can see our two URLs. Oh, sorry, wrong bit. Here we can see our two URLs, so Bing and Bing API, as well as other context variables. Some of these are specifically to do with the test controller and test agent. The Details tab shows us which extraction rules and validation rules have passed. There are two validation rules which are automatically included whenever you record a web test. They are the response URL and the response time goal validation. Now let's try and parameterize that first parameter. So I'll go to the first response, the first request, go to the response tab, and I'll press Ctrl F. You'll notice that I can select particularly which bits I want to look at. In this instance, I really want to be looking in the response bodies, and I want to be looking for the string that we want to find how to actually dig it out of the HTML code. If I press the find key and close that, we see that it's being set here. So if I take that and put that in the clipboard, we are now armed to create an extraction rule for this value. So I'm going to go to the first request. I'm going to go add extraction rule. First thing you'll notice is there are a lot of different kinds of extraction rules. You can extract from form fields, HTTP headers. In this instance, we want to extract the text just straight out. So I'm going to give it the name of a context variable that I want to create. So I'm going to call it my IID. Paste the start with, and then terminate the start with, in this instance with an apostrophe. You'll also notice that I have the facility to specify ignore case, use a regular expression, specify that this is required or not. If it's not required, then if it can't find it, it won't fail the web test. You can also specify to actually pull a random match or a specific number if there are multiple matches on the website, and also to tell it to decode the HTML prior to searching. In this instance, I'm going to save that. I now go to my second request, select the query string parameter that I wish to parameterize, hit the drop button, which will appear down here any second, there we go, and select my IID, which is the context variable I just created. Now if we run our test again, we should see our parameter is now listed in the context variables. So if I go to the first request and go to context and scroll down, my ID is now listed and its value is SERP.1000. I should also now be able to ascertain that on the second request, if I go to the request tab, our IID is still coming up with SERP.1000. And that is how you parameterize query strings. Returning to our web test, if we scroll down, somewhere near the bottom, we see our final comment from when we were recording the web test was validate testhouse.net is in the results. Well, let's do this, shall we? Selecting the search request, I right-click the request and select Add a Validation Rule. Again, note that there are numerous options. However, this time, in the interest of time, I'll select Find Text. Note that the validation level, high, medium and low, of the overall test can be set when the test is run. I'm going to set my find text to testhouse.net and make the validation case insensitive. Now if I run the web test, we can see if the validation rule worked. If I come down here to search and go to the details, we can see, as we have seen, there are ample extraction and validation rules. However, sometimes you need to push that envelope even further. To this end, there is a fairly simple, he says from a programmer's perspective, interface to enable you to define your own rules. Also, what we were not able to cover today was loops, conditions, calling web tests, web services, and transactions. Loops and conditions are just as diverse as extraction and validation rules and also have similar customization options. Calling a web test is a fairly simple process. Web services can be handled also without too much difficulty. However, I would recommend some knowledge of XML or JSON before you go down that road. Transactions give you the ability to group requests together for reporting purposes. We have also included some additional resources which include numerous hands-on labs, downloadable virtual machine, and Ed Glass's content index on web performance testing. Thank you. For further information on upcoming training, please visit our microsite www.th-ms.com. This concludes the demo. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.